Hi, it's Dr. Johnson talking a little bit about what we've just we're not done, but we're closing up Module 1 and we're moving on to Module 2. And there's a discussion that's gotten started online about Hicks reading, people working to make connections between G's concept of discourse communities, the Lancashire and Noble work around new literacies, and then Hicks's work, which is going to travel with us throughout the second module. And he starts out getting us to think about how we look closely at texts with an author's craft approach, and consider different genres of texts when we're reading and composing online digitally. So we're moving from the first module, which is really focused on educational technology and understanding the literacies that it facilitates, as well as the ways that it's changing or creating new literacies, given the way we're moving from offline to online contexts, from analog to digital modes of communication. And I think people have done a really awesome job here in discussion 3. Is that right? Anyway, week 3's discussion online, talking about their hashtagged images, and starting to pinpoint some of the ways that they function. In particular, Carolyn gets us started out. She's analyzing or explaining her hashtags, and what I think is really interesting is that her hashtags aren't literal. And this is certainly Caroline, and it's also helping us connect to the poster of the rhetorical functions of hashtags. So she's talking about what she wants readers to understand by her hashtag, that her dog is her best friend, playing on the concept of dog days are forever. Dog days are over. Dog days usually being bad. Clearly her dog day here being awesome, but then also her right now, her dog days are over. And then she ends on her sad note of homesickness, which you can't sense from this picture, so that's a subtext that we can read from this hashtag. So what I love is that people are choosing multiple hashtags that have different functions, and they're unpacking that. We're also starting to look at visuals and print together and the ways those combine to create new meanings, because that's really what this new module 2 that we're about to go into about digital communication is about. That's also what the digital world really highlights. And certainly people have been communicating through print and visual and audio and multiple modes, for a long time, forever really, except for the print. We'll look at some cave paintings like we did on the first day. So the print or the oral and the visual have been together since the beginning of time. But we're really going to be focusing on what happens to those when they start to move into online spaces, and how they get prioritized, right? When we look at websites, we have expectations for how they should look that are different than when we look at books. And when we communicate with people, we have expectations in digital spaces that are different than the expectations that we have when we're with them in person. So I want us to start thinking about that and add a layer. And this week, this weekend and the beginning of next week, you're going to start to add that layer, because we're going to start to be looking at professional educators' web texts. And this is that layer where we're going to start to be thinking about a discourse community. There are many of them. So professional educators is sort of that global discourse community that certainly, as people saw in Gamergate, there are often all these little sub-discourse communities. So you'll be starting to think about how you communicate in the discourse community of professional educators. And then you'll also be searching for, maybe some of you have already found, the online discourse communities that kind of push your buttons in good ways. Maybe for some folks, that's going to be English educators. Some it's going to be special educators. Some might even get more specialized, and it might be focused on educators of kids with autism. Some people might push back or push out of professional educators, or sit on the edge of professional educators and be looking at the world of potentially maybe someone who's a poet and a professional educator, so those intersections in and outside education. So you'll start to find those, and while we're doing that, we'll also be working to craft texts that can function in those communities, that communicate in those communities. And we'll be doing it in multiple modes. And we'll be thinking about what that is changing and what we're learning. So I want to come down here, I think it was to Gabby, and I want to highlight some of the way that she's talking about hashtags that I think points really directly to the function that hashtags, the multiple functions that hashtags can have. So Carolyn had that strong example of 3 hashtags with 3 different meanings that they can give us to enter into her picture of her dog. But then Gabby does a great job down here of also talking about all the different ways hashtags can work too. She says, and this comes out of her confusion and working to figure it out. I admit I did not understand what hashtags were or why they were so trendy and popular all over Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Then I realized how hashtags were a way of explaining where and what the person was trying to communicate. I noticed how even though hashtags are so short, usually one word tends to have several meanings. I want to highlight that because we're going to find that and keep finding that, and that's going to become one of the values our class is going to hold, the multiple meanings that these texts have. In my opinion, hashtags are more interesting and intriguing to see rather than having long paragraphs. So they change the way that we are expecting expecting things to work, right? Our interests, now I'm playing with what Gabby's talking about, our interest in working with long text still might be there, but there are so many more short texts that we're working with now on a daily basis. And I would argue visual texts as well, that we're flooded with them. They were always around, but now we are using them a lot more. And so our expectations of seeing them and what they can do are starting to change. And that would be, I think, I'm going to be arguing along with Lancashire Noble, a new literacy for interpreting visual media is critical. And developing. I believe hashtags tend to be a form of communication, I'm back to Gabby, and awareness of a certain word. So she's underscoring that they emphasize specific words. Hashtags tend to be words that represent or are actual programs, schools, songs, artists. Indeed, I believe hashtags help communicate the reason and the message that is trying to be addressed throughout the post. Usually hashtags are the shorter versions of a sentence. So Gabby does a great job here of highlighting how hashtags actually end up putting people's communicative texts into the discourse of particular communities, programs, schools. Maybe they put you in direct communication with artists. So now we're starting to see how they function in Twitter, and how Twitter as a platform, as a social media platform, has actually created or given the hashtag, and Instagram now has it too, and so does Facebook, and there are other platforms, but how they have created this new thing, this hashtag that can put all of these visual and print texts into these discourse communities. That they're So effectively creating this new literacy. That being able to hashtag an image and get it out there, circulating with others in those particular discourse communities, in of itself, doing that effectively is a literacy. Whoops-a-daisy. So now I want to scroll down one more time to, I think it was Megan down here. Where are you, Megan? My scrolling is not doing so well. There it is. There she is. So Megan also does a strong job of summarizing discourse community and bringing it into relation with Hicks. She says, based on the author's craft described in Hicks's book, I would say that hashtagging either a photo or a blog post, or even anything in general, is a type of author's craft. By using the hashtag, you are connecting information or a form of literacy to a variety of other secondary discourse groups. And I think this is a strong sentence here because she's putting Hicks in conversation with G, and she's also identifying, she's doing that through discussion of the hashtag. And so here we can see that these are secondary discourse groups. We didn't grow up hashtagging. Certainly we probably dove in at some point, but we also probably studied with an author's craft without knowing it. We looked at the ways that other folks were hashtagging, and we might have talked about it with them, or we might have looked across a lot of text and then started to realize how they were functioning, and then we started to do it. And doing it ourselves probably started to change our attention to see other types of or ways of hashtagging. So we might have started to learn new ways of hashtagging. Literal hashtagging, hashtagging to identify subtext, hashtagging to critique. You can look at the poster and I'm sure we can list a lot more. So they have a lot of functions. They're old ways of communicating, but they're functioning in this new place, and they're moving people into different discourse communities, and they're drawing our attention to the ways that image and print work together. So with that in mind, I look forward to scoring this conversation, which has started, and also talking really intently with you and making really intentionally with you several different digital compositions over the next few weeks. So we'll be starting with web text this week to come week 4, and moving along to eventually end up with some short videos. Doing it all as professional educators, though, and also studying these digital compositions as from an author's craft perspective. Looking forward to week 4. Talk to you soon.